And he is what I call a double colony kid. His grandparents were the Church colony family, and his great aunt and uncle were from the Paul Nelson colony family. So there's nothing he can do to get away from being a colony kid. He is. And he's going to share with us his collection of photos and also talk a little bit about how you can digitize and preserve your old photos.
Thank you. And I will use the mic so that I'm not yelling out too bad. So anybody who knows anything about the Colony Project right about now should be going, okay, who the heck is Bob Rieth? And as an explanation, my grandparents were Florence and Alfred Church. So once again, on the Colony Project, you should be going, who's Florence and Alfred Church? Well, Florence and Alfred Church, quite a few people know, were the brothers and sisters of, and I'll probably get this mixed up a little bit. So you have John and Julia Church and Margaret and Polly Nelson. And I will apologize to Paul Nelson. I can't quite get Paul Nelson out of my mouth because I've always known him as Polly Nelson. So I am a colony cousin, once removed, however you want to put it. I would like to point out a couple people in the audience and try not to embarrass them too badly. I did bring a bona fide colony cousin who is my mother, standing right there. Yay. And that's, so her name, if you don't mind, is Reedy Church. And then she's married to the nice young gentleman right behind her, Bob Leach. Sitting behind her is my sister, Christine O'Connor. And then her husband, John. And then sitting right here trying to hide behind the camera is my daughter, Jackie. So what I have here is a collection of photos and items that all belong to Florence Church, originally Florence Nelson. The little story here is that in about 1988 or so, my sister Christine was down in Bend, Oregon, as my grandma was cleaning out a closet, and ran across a shoebox full of negatives. And I mean full of negatives. She was going to throw them away. And exactly. My sister, bless her heart, said, you know, Bob is into photography, why don't I take those home to him? Hence why I ended up with negatives that turned out to be, from as early as the 1930s up through the 1950s and beyond. So what I did is, first thing I did is when I got them home, I was in UAA, went to the photo studio and made contact prints. And anybody who's ever done anything with photos can, you know what a contact print is. It's basically where you take the negative, you lay it on photo paper, expose it in an enlarger, and it's literally a picture of just the negative itself. I then took that many years later to the first Church Nelson family reunion as paper with a pen and sat down with Julia, Margaret, anybody I could get to talk to me. And what I did is I said, okay, identify as many people in this picture as you can. And it was so much fun listening to, you had Margaret, Julia, and Florence all looking at the pictures with my mom and all arguing about who was who. Now, anybody who ever met Julia, she was a slightly forceful personality, and we all know she was correct in all of them, no matter what Margaret said. Until, of course, Margaret came over to me later and explained how exactly wrong Julia was. That then, they sat in a file for years and years, and as the technology slowly, I say, started catching up, I bought a negative scanner and then actually scanned them and digitized them so that I can share them with everybody. And sorry, my voice is a little crackly. I just came down from the slope last night and I'm sporting a little bit of a sore throat. So what this is a very pared down version. There's 367 pictures. Not in this presentation. But I went through and just kind of sorted out through things that had to do with the Colony Project, Palmer. There's some Anchorage photos and whatnot. So if you hop right at it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump backwards in time a little bit. So the churches and the Nelsons are from Mountain, Wisconsin. This picture itself is actually a postcard, and on the back of it, which I don't have a copy of it, but on the back of it is a postage cancellation, where they canceled the stamp, dated August 1911. So me and my calculator-like brain, I can kind of say, okay, this picture was probably taken sometime before 1911. Next slide, Sherry. Same thing, this is the Lutheran Church in Mountain, Wisconsin. And it's also a postcard dated the exact same day by coincidence. And next slide. Some of these I'll go through fairly quickly. This is the schoolhouse in Mountain, Wisconsin. This is the school that my grandma Florence went to. The reason I know this is it's actually a picture, and on the back of it says schoolhouse, 1920. I will say, if anybody who's doing pictures, write down what they are. I actually have a couple archive pens that are acid-free, and even my own family pictures I've taken to turning it over and writing down, Jackie Rieth, because someday somebody's going to want to know that. So next slide. This is my grandpa, Alfred Church. We think this is about 1920s. This picture itself is this big. It's the size of a postage stamp.
Oh, wow.
I scanned it, enlarged it as much as I could to try and, make it come out. And it's also seems to be cut off of a much larger picture. But like I said, Alfred in the 1920s. So let's show this out. Next slide. This picture right here, that's my grandpa. Right here. And then next to him is an unknown male. And then next to him is Paul Nelson. And Margaret Nelson is looking between the shoulders of the two gentlemen there. This picture was taken in 1929. And the reason I know that, if you'll go to the next slide, is there's the same group of gentlemen, except my grandpa's missing. I'm assuming he's holding the camera. On this license plate, when you look at it after I scanned it, it says 1929. So once again, my calculator-like brain says, okay, this was probably taken somewhere around 1929. Still in Mountain, Wisconsin. Okay. Now this is the Nelson sisters. And anybody who has known the Nelson sisters, I can't help myself. I think when I see this picture, holy cow, what a handful. So this picture is taken the day before they left for Alaska. Or the day Julia, who's the second one from your right, left for Alaska. Now the reason that I know that is in this book, which you guys are welcome to come up and look at. Here is that picture. It's a slightly different people in it, and it says right on it, in the article that goes with it, the day before they left for Alaska. So, once again, my calculator-like brain kicked in. Okay, next slide. Now, these are the Nelson grandparents. This is one that I could definitely use some help with. Get that to figure it out. This is a gathering. That's about all I know, except for we have my wife and I home Butte Pizza. That's where my wife is right now.
Oh.
Lori Letter works for us, and she said every year during the colony days on July 4th, there'd be a colony gathering. Possibly it's a colony gathering, it's summertime. It's definitely calling. This gentleman here is who's referred to as Uncle Sam, and he shows up in a number of the other pictures. So if anybody else knows more about who Uncle Sam is, jump up and down. But everybody I've talked to, Facebook and whatnot, Oh, that's Uncle Sam. Okay, that clears that right up. Yeah,
Is Sam Warner?
Sam Warner, thank you.
It was at Margaret's uncle.
Yeah.
Okay, I will get with you after and I'll write that down. See?
And he used to go to Julia's first, and he had to clean up before he could go to Margaret's.
That barn that you just passed,
Yeah.
and that's the old well house at my dad's place, that barn.
Okay, so who was your dad?
John Church.
Awesome. Oh, definitely, we'll talk.
We're gonna take notes.
Awesome.
What's the name again? Sam Warner?
Yeah.
Sam Warner. I know the Warner
It
name.
wasn't Warner, it was
No, it's
Warner.
Warner.
Oh, Warner, okay.
N-N-E-R?
Yes.
Okay, got it?
Awesome. So moving along, this is Anna B. Nelson, who, for my mom and hopefully a couple other people in here, this is Grandma Nelson. She was my great-grandma. Listed on the side here is her kids. 9 children, I might add. And Florence Nelson, if you ask, where does Bob Rieth come from? This is my grandma. Next. And again, Anna Nelson. No?
Grandma.
Huh?
That's the other grandma.
Ooh, see? Mistakes can be made.
So who is this grandma?
So who's this grandma?
Official name, Melina, was a Warner and Mary Church, so Melina Church, otherwise known as Liney.
Awesome. Okay. I got this one right. So the thing is, even though this is a picture of Anna Nelson, which we've seen already, the thing that catches my attention here, this is at her farm at the Butte, and you'll notice all the banking on the side of the house. Anybody who's ever been in a colony house, it's not the warmest place on the planet, and they did bank literally with the dirt up to the level of the windows. In a couple of my other pictures that I don't have in this presentation, I have John Church shoveling the banking away from the cabin, or the house. Okay, next.
Why?
For insulation's sake,
No, they
it would get
pull
so
it-
cold.
Why did he pull it away?
Oh, in the summertime, so it didn't rot the logs. So you got the wet dirt up against the logs and rot the logs.
So you pull it away and,
Yep, let the logs dry out and whatnot. So Anna Nelson, go ahead. And Mom probably knows.
Anna Nelson and her brother, probably Nels Wallene. She had 2 brothers, Nelson Dan, I think this is Nelson. And he came up to visit her.
Cool. Okay, next, and I'll go a little bit faster. So this is the first one. This is Anna Nelson holding my uncle, Nels Church. And the little cutie on the side is the young lady sitting right over there. That's Rainey. And that is at the Butte Farm. 1947, and the reason I know this is Nels was born in 1947, and he looks about like a newborn. And again, Anna with Joe DeLong. This one I do not have a date on. Would have had to have been in the probably late 40s or so. Okay, next. And then there's Uncle Sam again with Anna Nelson and an unknown girl. And I thought for sure I knew exactly where this was because I see that barn every single day. Until I did the research and said that was the same as everybody else's barn. There is a barn exactly like that in my backyard. Next. And this is a kind of a long shot of Anna's farm. Like I said, this is the farm that still shows that it's got the silo and it says the Nelson Farms on it right off Bodenberg Loop. Next. And there they are, my grandma and grandpa. So this is a picture of my grandpa just about to be slapped by my grandma. And I love this picture because of the look on his face. So this is parents to Rainey and Nels Church. And they moved to the Butte, and I have the date wrong. I know that now. It should be 47 instead of 45. And Alfred Church in Anchorage at East H Place. in 1945, the year my mom was born. So anybody can calculate now how old my mom is. This picture is a Stewart's photo of my grandpa and my mom. I now know, thanks to my grandma's diaries, which I'll talk about here in a minute, that that was taken on September 18th, 1945, because it says, took Alfred and Renee to Stewart's photo for portrait. Okay. And this one I just love because that's one proud papa. Next. And my grandma, Florence Church, this would have been, we think, in about the 1940s or so. She came up in 39. Next. And same. Next. This is on the farm. So this would have been in 47, not 45. This is the Alfred and Church, and yep. So Florence and Alfred's farm, and that's the butte in the background, the same one I drive past, every single day. And once again, Florence Church, go ahead. This is Alfred and Renee Church and Nels Church, my uncle and my mom, on top of Grandpa's new tractor. Now you'll notice the new tractor is a whole lot newer than Ole's tractor.
Real tires on it.
Yeah, rubber wheels. So this one, and I'll apologize to my mother for messing the story up. This is my grandpa and Uncle Ole. Uncle Ole's on the cutter with holding my mom. Now the story, as my mom tells it, was she wanted to go out and see Dad and Uncle Ole cutting hay. She knew that the cutter was dangerous, so she walked around the side of the field. I can imagine a little blonde head about the same side as the grass. And it looks like Uncle Ole found her, scooped her up, and held her on her lap, and my grandma took a picture. Yeah.
That is about 1920s International Harvester binder.
Yeah.
Ah.
I have one just like it in my front yard. That came off of
Kellogg.
Louise Kellogg's place originally. My grandpa bought it from her. You know where that one is?
I do not.
Okay, just curious.
All I know is that's the farm and that's the butte in the background. I called it a cutter, but that would make more sense because I'm trying to figure out, okay, how the heck is it going to cut? So the next one, another shot of the same day, same picture. And then my grandpa Church mounting potatoes at the butte. And you'll know, for anybody who, reference-wise, we're looking straight at the butte, and right at the base of the butte was Margaret and Polly's farm, which is now the Reindeer Farm. I believe it was track 178 is their original track, and then a couple years later they bought 179 and merged the two of them together. And thanks to a couple of you guys here, that's why I know that. Okay. This is Colony Transportation, and this is actually the one I sent to Sherry to put on the website. This is my grandma with my mom and my uncle going down the road to Grandma's house.
4 to 8 in.
So this particular one is my grandpa again with his, and I messed up the name on it. It is his Alaskan tuxedo, and they bought it, I think it was on January 8th, 1943 for $42.50. The reason that I know that is it is referenced in here directly. Okay. Mom and grandpa. Slight little error in the picture. Okay. So this is Uncle Ole clearing land, we think at the butte, with his old tractor. Yep, and I can't help but think it's like, holy cow, that's a lot of work. Okay, next. Now this one is my grandma. The only thing we know, well, obviously she's dressed up. She's at Merrill Field. Okay, I sent this picture to the Aviation Museum and asked them, is there anything they can tell me about the airplane? And then in a slide or two, I've got a better shot of the airplane. And they about geeked out. This is, and according to their words, probably one of the most famous Stenson airplanes in the state of Alaska. It was bought by McGee Airlines, in 1932. It was then sold to Star Airlines in 1936, merged, acquired, and became Alaska Airlines. So next slide. This is my grandma all dressed up. Like my mom said, she doesn't know if she's ever seen her that dressed up. Same thing, this is on Merrill Field. The airplane in the background is a Pilgrim, which by coincidence is the sister ship for the Pilgrim that's sitting in the museum right now. And that one is, the one in the museum is John O'Connor sitting right over there, was his grandpa's airplane, Albert Ball, which when we first moved to Dillingham was still flying fish in and out. That airplane was built, what, in 1929, John?
I couldn't tell you for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right, it was.
Yep. So anyway, very small world. This is my grandma getting ready to go out to Naknek to work the cannery. She worked as a can packer for 3 years. I know at least 1 year out in Naknek and possibly 2 years in Anchorage, according to her diary. And from here to Naknek, if anybody's been out there, on the jet it takes about 50 minutes or so. Took 3.5 hours to get there. Okay. This picture, Uncle Sam, we're probably sure this isn't Ole. And thanks to you guys, we can probably put a last name on who Uncle Sam is. Okay, next. Now this is Anna Nelson's new farm. Okay, and the only reason I know that is on the back of the picture. It says Anna's new farm. Now I have seen on Facebook a number of responses back and forth of Anna's farm in Wasilla, and a couple people who didn't realize Anna's also had a farm in the Butte. So I'm putting 2 and 2 together and thinking this might be Anna's farm in Wasilla. Next. So this is my mom's uncle, Eddie, going into the military or in the military with his military buddies, and that's literally all we know about it, except I'm fairly certain they're standing on the Glen Highway, just from the mountains in the background. Okay, Ruth Nelson with Ole Nelson. Now the reason I like this picture is that's Ole's tractor with the saw attachment. I love that saw attachment. If you cut your fingers off, then you learn not to cut your fingers off. There is no guards, no nothing except for the bar that comes out where the saw comes through and chops the wood. And that picture, if you look on the negatives, that saw is spinning. Okay. And again, Ole with his new tractor. Okay. And this is my mom. This is just kind of a look at the Butte area. So that's the Butte in the background. So I don't know, this would probably make that Florence and Alfred's farm, just from the angle, or possibly Anna Nelson's farm. I know it's not Margaret and Polly's, only because theirs was too close up to the Butte. You'd have nothing but solid. Okay. Joe DeLong at Grandma Nelson's new farm. Okay. And then this is one just because I drive by this every day. This is my grandma and friend picking irises on the Eklutna Flats. Okay. And look at that cutie. She's sitting right over there. Next, this is at their in Anchorage at East H Place. Okay. Okay, so this is one of my favorite pictures. So it's kind of hard to see. So this is Ruth Nelson, Nilla DeLong, standing with Jim DeLong and Laverne Chicky Marnier. Now I will point out that it wasn't until I started researching this that I found out that Chicky had a real name. She was just always Chicky. Now one of the things I want to point out. So this picture was taken, what, 60, 70 years ago. Here is Nilla sticking her tongue out at her sister who's taking the picture. So word of warning, if you're taking, or if you're getting your picture taken and you stick your tongue out at your siblings, almost 70 years later, somebody might be displaying it in front of a historical society. Okay. And same thing. Jim and Laverne, with their new moccasins.
Oh,
I lost the notes. We had a little technical glitch, so I don't have the notes. But that picture is referenced in my grandma's diary, and it literally says, Jim and Chicky with new shoes. Okay. And Anna Nelson holding baby Nels, and Laverne Mornier, who is Chicky. Okay? We'll go through these relatively quick. Jim and Chicky DeLong, which I forgot to change to Laverne. And then Nilla holding Reedy Church in Anchorage. This one, don't have a date on. It would have been, what, Mom, about 46, 47?
Yeah, 46 or 47.
Okay.
Bobby, as Grandma got older, she went back to calling Nilla by her full Swedish name of Gunilla.
And I know, okay, so my sister Christine, to Grandma for years and years, was Chicky. So that also caused a little bit of confusion. When I would hear Chicky, I would automatically think, okay, Grandma's talking about my sister. Okay. So this is Norma Nelson on what we think is, this picture is actually, no, I fixed it, okay. So we think maybe first day of school with her new school clothes and her new lunchbox. And this would have been out at the Butte Farm. Okay. Ole Nelson, again, all dressed up, and like my mom said, she doesn't know she's ever seen him all dressed up like that. Okay. Rainey at each place, okay. And then this is Ole with Laverne, i.e. Chicky and Jim DeLong. That truck, this is with Ole's new truck. There's actually references in my grandma's diary about Grandma with Florence Church driving Ole's new truck. And I'm sorry, I cannot think of my grandma driving that truck. I never once saw my grandma behind the wheel. And in her diary, she talks about driving the truck, driving tractors, all kinds of things on the farm. So this is another one I was able to date. So you got Laverne and Jim DeLong. And the reason I was able to date this, yep, license plate says 1945 on it. So once again, I engaged my calculator like brain and assumed that this was about 1945 with Ole's new truck. So Ole got a new truck in 1945. Florence Church and Anna Nelson with Uncle, who we now have a last name for. Okay. And then Florence Church, and this is actually with her friend Gladys's baby. So long story, but the reason I left this in here is that is also directly referenced in Grandma's diary. And I'll talk about the diary here in just a second. Okay. So East H Place in Anchorage, about 1945, the year my mom was born. Again, I'll give away how old my mother is. So Ole Nelson with Nels Church standing on the tractor. Reedy, Mom, is driving, and then Laverne on the tractor. Okay. And then Anna Nelson, Florence. We don't know who the soldier is or the unknown female. I did notice in my grandma's diaries that she talks about the soldiers and the soldiers' wives being evacuated during World War II. So don't know if that has anything to do with this, but I just thought that was pretty fascinating. Okay. And Reedy with Lorraine Church. So this is a hunting camp. I will say these guys were a whole lot tougher than I am when they went hunting. They have a tarp. Okay. One thing I will notice is I'm fairly sure that I know for sure. This is my grandpa, and the gun he's holding is a .300 Winchester that I have. So could be a different gun, but it's definitely the same design. Okay. And then Alfred with Ole Nelson in 1939. Again, how I figured that out is license plates. License plates are awesome. Okay.
Boy, that's a nice car.
That is a nice car. I would love to have that car. And Grandma with her sisters again. Okay. I don't know how I missed the captions on these ones. One more time. Okay, Ruth Mornier. Okay. All right, so this is the one the picture that I put on the front of the book that I had made. So you've got Nelda sitting all the way on the left side. You've got Nels, Laverne, i.e. Chicky, Joe DeLong, Jim DeLong, and Renee Church. So these are colony kids and colony cousins. And what I did, and you can all come up afterwards and take a look, Google pictures. And I had them, I created a book, and that's my cover. And anybody who wants to look at this, I am so impressed at how Google Pictures, or Google Books did this. Okay. And there would be Renee and Nels Church playing with dolls. Okay. Again, Renee and Nels, 48-ish or so. Okay. That's the one I wanted to get to. So this is bath time at the Butte. So that would be my mother and my uncle taking a bath before being allowed to go back inside for lunch and nap time. Okay. The thing is, me and my sister, Christine, who's sitting over there were times when we would be with Grandma and Grandpa up in Fairbanks, and we would be so covered in dirt, Grandma would make us strip before we came into the house. Rightfully so, because boy, we had fun in the dirt.
They never took a picture.
And then this is Renee and baby Nels at the church. I'm kind of curious as to see what Renee was trying to feed Nels, but she said she wasn't trying to feed him anything. And same thing, okay. Renee and Nels, 48 and 49. This is at the Butte farm. Now this is, I did notice the log farm, and it seems to be a lot more grown up, so I'm kind of thinking that this is at Anna's farm, which is literally just down the road. Okay. And again, okay. And baby Renee. Okay. We can go through these relatively quickly. Yep. Needless to say, I'm kind of attached to these two individuals. Yeah. So again, there's Renee with Uncle Ole, Nels, and Laverne on the new tractor. I'm almost thinking the new tractor was, all these pictures were probably taken on the same day, just because Ole's dressed the same way, same everything. And back then, not everybody had their iPhone out to take 1,000 pictures of everything. Okay, so this is Renee and my mom and my uncle. This is actually the store in downtown Palmer. The building's still there. And Mom, what was the name of the store?
John, I don't remember the name of the store, but it's the little triangle-shaped building on the far side of the railroad tracks.
It's now a law office. And I got on Google Maps and was able to find the building itself. Having lollipops. The other thing I noticed is if they're anything like us kids in the summertime, their shoes went away sometime in mid-May. So in bare feet. Okay. And then again, Alfred Church, my mom and my uncle on Butte Farm, with the Butte in the background, facing the other direction. Okay. And then Renee with Dolly at Butte. This was in 47, we think-ish. Okay. And baby Renee all dressed up in East Anchorage, East Stage Place. Okay. Alfred, Renee and Nels. Okay. And somehow I managed to duplicate that one. So, okay, so last slide, and this one I put in just for the fun of it. So this is my grandma and grandpa. This is how I remember them. That is Joe Foltz, and yes, that is an entire gold pan full of gold.
Oh.
The story, and I distinctly remember doing this, in Grandma and Grandpa's house, there would be coffee cans sitting there as doorstops that us kids, they were heavy enough we had a hard time moving them. Didn't think anything of it. This guy named Joe would show up. If we were there, we would spread it out on the table. This is about a 7-foot around kitchen table. And we would help Joe pick out the pretty ones. And Joe would then sell the gold nuggets to the jewelers and sell the rest of them to the smelter. So given today's prices, I can't even imagine how much gold is sitting in there. But it was normal. The Grandma and Grandpa's house had coffee cans full of gold.
Only when Joe was there.
Only when Joe was there, yeah. Yeah, not sitting around all the time. So that's the last one on the slides. So what I would like to do, I brought up just some memorabilia and some of
Get the lights,
the...
Heather.
what's quickly becoming a collection, and I don't even know how that happened. The dolls here are dolls that my grandpa would make on the lathe. This is in a group of my grandma's pictures, and all it says is ancestors. So if you recognize, please come up and tell me who you recognize, anything that you know about it. Okay? Now this is Ole Nelson. With this, I know the youngest is Alice. Mom probably knows who the older one is.
Julia or Tina, maybe.
Yeah. And this Ole Nelson was Anna B. Nelson's
Oldest son,
right? See, this is how I find out all this information. Mom and I actually sat down with the computer screen twice and went through these saying, okay, who is who? Okay, next slide. And then Paul and Ole Nelson, this is in Mountain, Wisconsin again, possibly. It could actually be up here at the colonies. At the colonies. How about at the Matanuska? And Paul and Ole Nelson sometime in the 30s. Okay. Now, we're leaving Mountain, Wisconsin. We've arrived in Alaska, and those of you who know the colony project, now this may or may not be an actual colony tent, but it is, you know, we hear stories of they moved into wall tents. I think this is slightly different. The only thing here is this was in a patch of negatives that are marked Ole Nelson, and it actually has a wooden floor in it. So it wasn't just, I'm assuming it wasn't just a hunting tent that was thrown up there. Next. Typical farmhouse. You guys have seen these all over the place. Maybe even lived in one or two. This one, I don't know the location, but it was one of, I think there were 5 different designs. And the one that I noticed on this one is the round logs. And the next slide. And the next design with the squared off logs, the 3-sided logs. So this was my grandparents' farm. Now let's back up for just a half a second. Alfred and Florence Church Florence came up in 1939 after the original colonists. Alfred came up in 41. They were married in 43, and in 45 they moved out to the Butte and farmed from what, Mom, 45 through?
Farmed from 47 through 51.
Okay, so
50.
that's pretty close. So 47 through 51. Now you can actually see the Butte in the background. By coincidence, this is less than a mile from my house. Okay, next. This is Anna B. Nelson's house. This is otherwise known as Grandma Nelson's farm. This house is still there. On Bodenberg Loop, you go around the corner, the big silo that says Nelson Farms on it. This house is, you know, I would just drove by it today going, yep, sure enough, still there. Okay, and you guys can probably help me with this. This is a loafing shed, maybe at Paul Nelson's. Now, pardon me, I'm not a farmer. You know, what's a loafing shed? For the cows. Thank you. And horses. Now, the story behind this shed is that my grandpa, Alfred, probably Paul Nelson, probably a number of the other men were under contract, and they tore down the Lucky Shot mine. So this was about 1950 up in Independence. That's where most of this wood comes from, according to the story. Kind of makes sense because you'll notice the siding is kind of all mixed and matched. And then I know Grandpa always used to say about all the lumber that they salvaged out of the Lucky Shot mine. So next slide. This one, the only thing I know about it, and you guys can help me here, is it says bunkhouse 1940s. My mom and I are kind of thinking maybe the Palmer nurse's bunkhouse. Could be, you know, like I said, if you know anything about it, jump up and down and get with me later, because I'd love to have more information on it. Next. Typical farm. This is Anna Nelson's new farm over in Wasilla, as near as we can figure. Now keep in mind, some of this stuff I'm guessing on just on where it's located. One of the things is the barn. You guys have all seen these before. That's a standard barn. Okay, so you had 5 different house designs and 1 barn design. So you got the barn that they gave you. And I'm sure you all know that way better than I do. This is the sawmill that is in my my mom's uncle. I've taken to calling him Uncle Ole, but Uncle Ole's negatives also. That would probably mean out at the Butte, but that's not necessarily so. Next.
Oh, yeah.
The brand new Connect River Bridge, complete with wood planking. You can see the road coming off this direction. So obviously that's the bridge pointing towards the mountain that we've all seen probably 1,000 times or more. And that is almost the view from my front window. That is actually from Albert and Florence's farm, we think, or from the reindeer farm.
No.
So Margaret and Polly's farm. Now this one, this is my mom's Uncle Eddie, we think, we're fairly certain, driving a dozer. Okay, so he's driving it over, so what? If you look at the background, and you guys can all, correct me when I'm wrong, please do. This is the river, and you've got the mountains. We know it was around Palmer someplace, which I begin to think that could be the Matanuska River. The mountains and the configuration, I just drove up there the other day going up towards Sutton up the hill. That would mean he possibly could be on the Glen Highway. Okay? And I may have this wrong. If so, jump up and down and say, no, you got this wrong, that's what that is. I do know that Eddie and my grandpa drove dozers and cat skids and everything else under the planet. So next slide. That's Uncle Ole with the new tractor. And this one is an actual picture, and the reason that I know this is it says on the back, Ole's new tractor. I do not have a date. If anybody has a date, the tractor is relatively distinct except for the other 100,000 of them that they made that year.
Steel wheels, that's looking early.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So next slide. All right, so here is the Church and Nelson clan families. I won't read through each one. You're welcome. I can display it afterwards, and you can go through every single individual there. That is a fairly large family. The one person I will point out, Margaret and Polly Nelson and Anna Nelson, who is Grandma Nelson, grandma to my mom. Right? Same picture, and it's reversed, we think. Or the first one was reversed. We don't have any way to know. I have scoured these pictures for any type of writing that's mirrored or reversed. We do know that that's Ruth taking the picture with a Brownie camera. And that negative is in this batch of negatives. Unfortunately, at the time, on the negatives, and I go to my photography background, was before they were pre-printing on the negatives, things like Kodak, Kodalux, things like that. So I couldn't even look